Okay, joining me on the Freedom Pack podcast today, I have longtime friend of the show, Ben Aldridge. Ben, welcome back to the Freedom Pack podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me back.
It's an absolute pleasure, man. I think you've been on like 3 or 4 times. There was one time where you really helped me out. I was struggling schedule-wise, and, I give you a shout on a night's notice, and then we were up at 5 a.m. the next morning recording. So, yeah, always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, I remember that one, actually. I thought that came out really well. Surprisingly, the fact that we were both so tired, but it was quite a natural and really enjoyable conversation.
Yes. I mean, I think we were talking, it was all about Stoicism. So we were talking about getting yourself out of your comfort zone. And then we were at 5 o'clock in the morning trying to think about philosophy. So we were doing just that.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect training.
Well, you're here today to talk about your new book, and we'll let these guys know exactly where to find that. But first of all, let's get into some of the themes of the book. So, actually, I want to start a little bit more personal. There's a point in the book where you say, it felt like philosophy saved me. How so? And what did philosophy save you from?
Yeah, so this is really the gateway into this whole journey of becoming a writer for me. So in my mid-20s, I was hit with really bad anxiety, and I started having these really intense panic attacks. And there's a whole story around this, but basically that got me into Stoicism, and I needed to find a way to understand my mind and to get out of that situation. And I stumbled upon the Stoics, and their advice was so practical and helpful. And ultimately, that's what changed my relationship with that anxiety, allowed me to actually kind of live a normal life again. And that was really the starting point. And then from that point on, I got into all these other philosophies as well, kind of fell in love with so many different ideas. And yeah, ever since then, it's been trying to use ideas in my life and see how I can bring them into different experiences that I'm encountering.
Do you remember what your first introduction to Stoicism was? Was it a book? Was it a podcast? Where were you first introduced to it?
Yeah, so I was doing extensive reading at the time to try and figure out, firstly, what was happening to my mind, why I was so anxious, and then to figure out what I could do. And I think it was Tim Ferriss kind of set me off down the path of Stoicism. I can't remember exactly where I read it, but I remember it was Tim Ferriss, and then I went down the Ryan Holiday rabbit hole with all of his books, and then actually went to the primary sources, Marcus Aurelius, and then Seneca and Epicurus, and just devoured this philosophy and found it incredibly practical. And yeah, from that point on, I fell in love with it. I think when I could see that it was working and helping me in my life, that's when I knew that there was like a real power to these ideas.
So your new book centered really around the theme of happiness. And as you mentioned there, you talk about different schools of philosophy. You don't focus in on just one. You take bits from different philosophies that have helped you over time. Let's start with it then, happiness. What did happiness mean to the ancient Greeks, and how did they view it a little bit differently to how we view it today?
Yeah, so they had a really interesting take on happiness. And I think nowadays there is often a conditional type of happiness. We will be happy when or if, when I get the new house. And then you get into the new house and then you're like, oh, well, now I need a bigger house. And it's this, they call it hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill, where we're constantly seeking more. And it's very conditional. I'll be happy if I get this amount of followers on social media, or if this happens. And we're just chasing this experience of what we think is going to be happiness. But the ancient Greeks had a different approach. There's a word called eudaimonia, which is roughly translated as happiness, but it's more like flowing, or a life that flourishes well. And the purpose of eudaimonia is to essentially build character, build a virtuous character, so that you can handle whatever happens to you in life. And there's a deeper meaning behind this, so that when we experience difficult things, we know that there's a higher purpose. We're able to kind of connect to that type of happiness that is connected to meaning. And whatever happens, we are still building character. So this is a nice way of framing happiness that isn't based on external conditions. We're always going to be progressing, and building character is very much at the center of this new book as well. We look at all these different philosophies that can help us to build character and connect to that eudaimonia, which is a really nice way of approaching happiness, because obviously you can't be happy all the time. Bad things are going to happen to all of us. And it's what do we do when we encounter them, and how can we turn them into experiences that have value?
And one, big theme of your work from your very first book, through your second book, the deck of cards you brought out, has been the idea of challenges. Now, what role do challenges play in building character? And what are some of the challenges that maybe you've taken on since we've last spoken that have helped you build your character?
So the role of challenges is so important, I think, because that's where it takes ideas off the page and it makes them actionable in real life. Because when you read about something, I mean, it's going to stay in your mind maybe for a week and then it might drift away. Maybe if it's an impactful idea, yeah, it'll stay with you for a bit longer. But it's when you actually start to use it that you connect to it on a deeper level. And that's why I've always wanted to have challenge as part of my work in all of my books. It is a theme. It's a real call to action. And I think that really helps to solidify the idea in the mind. When you do something and you have an experience, that is first-hand knowledge of how the philosophy can be applied or how it can help you. So I think that's really important. And I'm always trying to continually push myself and seek out new challenges. But I'm a dad now. I think last time we spoke, I think it was 2 years ago. So that was quite early days. My son's nearly 3 now. So naturally, my challenges have slightly changed being a father. There's lots of different things to balance. But one of the things that I did in the early days, because when, new parent, you've got this little tiny baby and you're still thinking, naturally, life is quite challenging anyway. How can you continue to push yourself a little bit? So one of the challenges I did that was quite fun, I say quite fun, it was quite hard actually, was to train to do 100 push-ups in one hit, basically, without a rest. And that took a long time to get from where I was at the beginning. And there was a whole group of people doing it. It was actually quite interesting. And it was a charity kind of event to raise money for teenagers and kind of all around mental health and mental health awareness. So it was a good cause, but it was an amazing experience. And there was a real commitment to discipline. And there's all these people just getting involved and trying to, go off and train by themselves. And that was something that I could fit into my life, even though it was very busy at that time. And that really sticks with me as a particularly interesting challenge from the last few years.
Yeah. How do you feel about sort of, there are many challenges in the book that are, quite quick challenges you can do in the course of a day or a couple of days. But how important do you think it is to set yourself a longer challenge, maybe a certain goal to work towards? You mentioned there the 100 push-ups. Something I've signed myself up for a marathon next year, even though I'm dreadful at running. And that was the point for signing up, really, just to see if I could get there. How important do you feel it is to set yourself a long-term challenge or a long-term goal? Because I think you learn a lot about yourself along the way. And I think it brings in, you mentioned their discipline to play. Everyone can be motivated one day of the year or to do one little challenge over the course of one day. When you set yourself a goal that could take 6 months, 7 months to a year, that's when you really learn that, discipline is what counts, and that, discipline will always trump motivation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you've put it perfectly there, really. That's the reason to connect to a slightly bigger challenge. I think it's important to have a mix of them. So I do think it's quite good to punctuate life with these smaller challenges and seek out different experiences, but then having something that's ongoing that you can connect to and you can actually notice progression within that, whatever it is, that field, whether it's a sport or a skill, and to actually see it increasing, because you're going to get experiences that you wouldn't get with, as you said, a one-off challenge. Maybe you do it once, have an ice bath once and that's it. That in itself is an experience and you're going to gain a lot from that. But if you're committed to something in the long run, there are many valuable lessons along the way that you wouldn't get from the one-off experience. So I think it's important to have a real mix of all these different types of challenge. So yeah, maybe picking a couple that are relevant to you. But I think the long-term challenges as well, especially the ones that you commit to, it does make sense for them to be things that you want to do. Yeah. So I know that sometimes you can challenge yourself, maybe, I don't really want to do this. Maybe I should do it. But if you're doing something long-term, like long-term thinking, I think there's value in actually wanting to do it as well, because otherwise it's, you're going to invest a lot of time, and actually what are you getting out of it if you're not enjoying it, or you haven't got this higher purpose to work towards?
When was the last time you took a banana for a walk?
Do you know what? It hasn't been too long. I was doing it while my son was in the pram and my wife was sort of behind filming me. And that was kind of less embarrassing actually than when I've had to do it by myself, because I think there was knowing that someone else is in on the gag in a way made it not too bad. But actually I say that, the last time was probably a few weeks ago when I did a speaking engagement. So I always tend to, one of the key things that I love to do, the grand finale of a lot of my talks, is to walk a banana in front of everyone and kind of encourage people to connect to this idea. And so I'll be taking bananas whenever I go and do gigs all over the country. So that's quite a fun experience. I guess I need to give you some context, because we've kind of dived straight into the banana walk and it kind of sounds a bit weird, but there is an ancient practice that the Cynic philosophers of ancient Greece used to do, where they would deliberately embarrass themselves in public. And this was done as a way to build resilience and also to get over this sense of fear of being judged by others. And the famous philosopher Diogenes, he used to drag a pet jar on a piece of string through the Agora, a marketplace in Athens. And this was such an interesting idea that a modern psychologist called Albert Ellis created an entire therapy, and a huge part of his therapy, which is REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, is based on this very idea of embarrassing yourself in public. And his number one famous exercise is the banana walk. So he's taken this inspiration from Diogenes in ancient Greece, and he encourages people to walk a banana in public as a way to feel embarrassed and then to learn how to kind of work through that. And interestingly, if you go to the Albert Ellis Institute in New York, you will often be able to spot people walking bananas up and down the street outside the Institute. And I think it's such an amazing idea because it is powerful, and honestly, it's embarrassing. I think you need to try it. I think everyone should try it, because it is a strange experience. People will laugh at you, they'll look at you, and especially if no one else is around, you haven't got friends with you, you're doing it by yourself. Like I said, when my wife was filming me, it wasn't so bad because I knew it was, there's someone else there. There's a little bit of moral support. But when you're by yourself and you're walking down a busy street, you do have this internal dialogue, and that is what's so interesting. How do you talk to yourself when you're doing something embarrassing? And it's a very practical way to connect to ancient Greece. And I kind of like that connection. And that's why I always talk about the banana walk and try and incorporate it into a lot of the things that I do.
Yeah, I think being comfortable with being or doing embarrassing things is something everyone wishes they had that power. I think, everyone knows certain people in their lives that are those types of people that never get embarrassed. My brother, he never gets embarrassed about anything. He can, you could sign him up to the stupidest karaoke song, or you could, ask him to wear the most ridiculous thing out, and he just will not flinch. He does not care what people think. And I think some people are just built like that. But some people are really conscious of how people perceive them. I'm probably one of those people. I really struggle with feeling embarrassed. But I'm sure, like myself, everyone wishes they weren't like that. When you're doing something like you mentioned there, like the banana walk, what advice would you give to someone who genuinely can't even conceive the possibility of doing something like that? Like, what's the first step they could take? Is it some sort of self-talk? Is it maybe building yourself up and starting with something small? Like, how do you make that step?
I think you've got to, if you have a really serious aversion to it, I think in a way that says, okay, there's some work to be done there and you will probably benefit from doing this. So that's instantly, quite a useful thing to know. And I think what you've got to do is you've got to frame the situation right. You're not doing it to punish yourself. This isn't to make your life harder. It's actually to make your life easier. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to grow as a human being and you're trying to build confidence and self-trust. And when you frame it like that and you see that this is actually going to help with confidence, the more you do it, the less embarrassed you get. And actually it does become, it does get easier the more you do it. Now, as you said, some people will naturally be able to do this. They're okay. They're fine. But a lot of people will find it difficult. And I think it's a fascinating experiment, and you will be forced to kind of talk to yourself and challenge that internal dialogue, which can be the start of a really powerful transformational process. So I think if you're worried about it and you're thinking, oh, there's no way I could do it, that to me screams you need to at least think about doing it. And then maybe you can warm up by doing some other things that aren't as embarrassing, like maybe wearing a color that you would never wear, or a type of, outfit that you would never wear, or have a new haircut. Maybe a haircut's a bit too committing, but something where you can start off by doing something that you think is a little bit out of character for you. And then you have to kind of sit with that feeling and then build it up from there. And before you know it, you'll be walking bananas, wearing very bizarre hats or whatever. People are embarrassed in different ways. I mean, watch Impractical Jokers for inspiration.
Yeah.
Do you know that show?
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. But that's it really. That's shame attacking. So this concept is called shame attacking. Yeah. And that's really what the show is. It's just getting, their mates trying to embarrass each other. And it's really funny to watch.
So cynicism, this is a word that, has changed over the years, probably means something completely different now to what it would have meant back then. There's a famous cynic, you mentioned the book. He was asked what they got out of cynicism. They replied, if nothing else, I'm prepared for whatever happens. How do they prepare themselves so?
Yeah, so that's really this training and this type of seeking out discomfort. And we call it voluntary discomfort in Stoicism, but Stoicism got it from the Cynics. The Cynics actually trained the Stoics. And this whole concept is in ancient Greek, in Greek it's called askesis. That's the training. And what you do is you basically step outside your comfort zone. You do something challenging, and this builds resilience. And that's really a cornerstone to Cynic philosophy. It's one of the key components and to this wonderful ancient philosophy. But the Cynics were quite extreme. Some of the stuff they did was really wild. Diogenes, the famous Cynic, used to do some bizarre stuff. And obviously we don't need to encourage people to do that, but he would urinate, defecate in public as a way to challenge societal norms. And actually for the Cynics, freedom of speech was the most important thing to them. And in fact, Diogenes said, freedom of speech is the most beautiful thing in the world. So this was hugely important to the Cynics, and why a lot of them chose to live such difficult lives outside of the system in a way. So a lot of them would live on the streets of Athens, deliberately choosing to live a life of poverty so that they weren't answerable to a state. They didn't have to worry about losing a job or losing a reputation because they didn't have anything to lose. They were in the ultimate position to question and criticize society. So in a way, they were kind of like the trolls of ancient Greece. I remember hearing someone say that, and I thought that was brilliant. That's such a great way of describing these amazing philosophers.
Yeah. There's probably a few people out there who are considering following their lead at the moment as well. Speaking of changing societal norms then, another character that you mentioned in the book, Socrates, and his quest to really teach people to think for themselves and, question everything. This has to make Socrates one of the most important figures in human history, would you say?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I think that coupled with Socrates was all about acknowledging that you don't know everything, knowing your limits. We have a finite mind, and it's being aware of that, being aware of our own ignorance, and also the quest for knowledge and really trying to dig into so many different topics. And that's such a beautiful way of viewing the world. And it's very scientific. It's actually the foundations of science, if you think about it. Continually asking questions, keep checking and seeing how that thinking progresses. And yeah, I mean, what an amazing thing to have really drilled down, as that's his thing, really, when you think about philosophy. That's why he's the grandfather of Western philosophy, really, because of such a huge thing that he's contributed.
What is meant by the Socratic method?
So this is when you basically grilling someone. You get someone who has an opinion on something, and then you kind of grill them on it. It's like a cross-examination. So there's various things you can do. It's very much like in a courtroom where someone would go up and they would say, oh, I did this. And then Socrates would come up and start to like really thoroughly investigate and question them and say, oh, so you think this? And they would go, yes, I think that. And then he would go, but hang on a minute, that contradicts what you just said a second ago. So it's a way of bringing in contradictions within people's thinking so that suddenly their entire opinion on things would collapse and crumble and have no foundations, because how can you think this if you also think this? So it's that's why Socrates was quite an interesting character. A lot of people found him annoying because he would be going around asking these questions and really just highlighting people's inconsistencies in their thinking. And I think he was very open. You know, he said, we don't know. But a lot of people are very arrogant and would say, oh, I do know. I know everything. So he would go and just grill them and school them in philosophy. So I think it's quite a nice, really humbling for if you're open to being humbled by that. But you can understand why people got annoyed with him.
Yeah, I mean, he sounds like the ancient version of that guy that would come up to someone in the street and point at their band T-shirt and tell them to name 5 songs if they're a real fan.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, exactly.
So with the Socratic method then, not that you would say out there, go out to your friends and grill them over their opinions, but is this something we should apply to ourselves? Can we have these conversations with ourselves?
I think it's better to have it with ourselves to begin with, because we all have, maybe we've developed things, you know, blind spots in our thinking. So actually going through and questioning our beliefs and questioning the way that we interact with the world is really beneficial. I think is super helpful before we start pointing our fingers at other people and, you know, accusing them of hypocrisy. We should look inside and see that we probably are having our own experience of hypocrisy in the way that we maybe live. So it's interesting to tap into that and kind of see what comes out of it.
And with Socrates, how did his death come about? Because even that seems stoic. He just drinks a cup of poison with like no resistance and just accepts it, right?
Yeah, so that's the story behind it. But he was sentenced to death by the Athenian courts for corrupting the youth and having bad opinions on things. Okay. And really, when you dig into it, it seems that he annoyed some people who were quite high up in Athenian society by challenging the norms and questioning the way that the society was run. And I think that in itself was really the key. But there's a lot of mystery around it. But yeah, he basically took that and he said rather than sort of run away from his fate, he chose to face it directly and to sort of leave the world in a way that would kind of keep him true to his philosophy of saying, well, no, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just asking questions and I'm not going to run away from this situation. I'm going to face it. And that in itself has quite a lot of power. So we remember his story for his sort of defiance. You know, he was, in a way, his mind was free, even though he was trapped in prison at the end. So it's interesting.
What sort of things was he challenging and questioning?
From everyone within society, just kind of going into the way that people would think about things. And if you look at some of the books, there's a great book called The Last Days of Socrates by Plato. And it really goes into some of the court case and the way that he would go around having debates. And a lot of it's just about kind of, you know, there's a lot of old examples. And I think, he would go around questioning and having these debates and helping people to kind of formulate logic and kind of develop that. So you can get into I'd recommend getting into the actual, kind of Plato's take on it, because there's two sources we have for Socrates. We have Plato and Xenophon, and those are the two main sources. Most people were familiar with Plato. They might have heard of some of his work before, but Xenophon is the other one. And these two philosophers basically build this image that we have of Socrates and what he did. So those are the sources. So if you're interested in getting it straight from the horse's mouth, then I would recommend checking them out.
Do those sources tend to marry up with each other and sort of reflect the same things?
I think they have slightly different takes. I mean, at the end of the day, they still portray Socrates as this bloke who questioned everything.
Yeah.
And that's really the key take home. So we've got, I think the thing is lots of people go into depth in this, and there's some fantastic scholars as well who go in really, really deep. I'm not a scholar. My background isn't, certainly not an academic background for this. And I think there's a lot of people who write on this subject and really get into the nitty gritty. But at the end of the day, the key take home is that both of them did align with the fact that he would just question everything. And that's, that's stood the test of time, really.
Well, one thing you've always done in your work is apply these ideas, apply these strategies, apply these philosophies, and give examples of how you've used them in your own life. The way you do that in this book, you talk about decision making and some of the big decisions you've made in your life on relocating to and from the big city. You talk about Aristotle's strategy for decision making. What is that strategy?
Yeah, so Aristotle has contributed so much to Western thought, and he's such a big character. But I found that I didn't have time in this book to really unpack a lot of what he was doing. So I had to be quite specific. And there's one idea that I connected to when I got into Aristotle, and it's my favorite idea that I've taken from him. And I think it's very practical. And it's this decision-making method that he basically has 8 steps that he recommends to use if you have a big decision to make. So we can go through each step if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this works for a big decision, not so much if you're trying to decide what to have in a restaurant. Yeah, exactly. So we'll go through it. So the first thing you need to do is give yourself time to make a decision. That's important. Don't rush it. Second thing is you need to make sure you're in a clear mental state. So don't be drunk. Don't be really, really tired or in severe pain or really emotional. You need to be in a clear mental state to make a good decision. Then you need to look at all the facts. Bring everything into one place so that you can really see what you've got in front of you. And for some people, that might be, pie charts and stats and getting everything all together so that they can actually look at it and see, right, this is everything all in one place. Then you want to consult an expert. So say you want to learn the piano, you're going to go and speak to someone who can play the piano. Not going to try and learn from someone who doesn't play piano. That'd be a disaster. So there's value in experts, but also we need to be careful because we can't have blind faith in experts as well. But it does make sense to speak to someone who has some experience of what you're trying to do. Then you want to think about everyone who's going to be impacted by the decision. So think about your family, think about your friends, think about anyone else involved in this decision, and try and consider how it will affect them. Then you want to think about history. How has this decision played out historically in your life, if you've had to make it before, but also big picture? Maybe someone else in human history has had to make a similar decision. How did it go? What can you learn from it? And then the final 2 steps, you need to look at the probability of what's going to happen. So how likely is X, Y, Z? And then finally, luck. How does luck impact it? So if you get green lights on everything, what's the best case scenario? What could happen if everything goes your way? But also, what happens if you have red lights all the time? What's the worst case scenario? Now, those are 8 steps. Now, if you consider all of those when you're doing a big decision, then you will have thought about it very holistically. Yeah. And that will really set you up. And then you can kind of mull over your decision, and Aristotle will, have set you up to make a nice, well-informed, well thought out decision.
I love that. That's such practical advice, and so much so, for some reason, I found myself writing down the 8 steps as if I don't already own your book and have it available to me. But there we are. So can you give us an example then of a time in your life that you've had a big decision to make, and you've maybe used this method for yourself, and did it pay off for you?
Yeah, man. Yeah, exactly. This whole book. And so when this book, well, I got 3 offers for this book. 3 different publishers were interested in this book, but it would have been very, very different for each publisher. So it wouldn't be the book it is. The Seriously Happy, this new book, would not be what it is now. And there were different audiences. So this book is actually aimed at teenagers and young adults. So this was a big decision because there were 3 fantastic offers, and I felt very lucky to be in that position. But each decision would have taken me in a very different direction. So actually, I managed to use this and applied it and found that it was really helpful, and it gave me real clarity on what I wanted. And it made the decision actually quite easy. And I'm just so happy with where it is now. And I'm so pleased with this final product and how it's all come together. So, I mean, it really did work for me. And I think that's a nice example of it in action.
Yeah, that's amazing. Beautiful, man. And, I think a book like this aimed at, teenagers, I think is so important because there's no end to the amount of books that are available to someone on this subject, but there's very little targeted at that age group. And I think that's probably the age group that need it the most. I certainly wish that I was introduced to philosophy at a much younger age. They didn't teach it in my high school at all. It wasn't something that was ever mentioned. It was only something I was able to learn about through YouTube when I was in university, or, checking books out of the university library, but it was never something that was put on a plate for you or was really accessible to you as a young person. I don't know if you had a similar experience, when you were in school, but I do think it's so important that we bring these subjects to the youth, for them to start thinking for themselves, to start, applying different schools of thought, trying things out rather than just, doing what they've always done. I wish I had a book like this when I was younger.
Well, in a way, I do as well. I feel that if I'd come across philosophy earlier in my life and actually started using it, I think I would have probably had a different experience and not kind of descended into that pit of anxiety in my mid-20s. So I think there is so much value in it, and it's hard enough being a teenager. I found it really hard being a teenager. I didn't like it, found it difficult, struggled. And I think a lot of people, the teenage years are really tough anyway. But if you look at what's happened over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been brutal. It's been hard for everyone. But I think times that by the fact that you're a teenager, you've got big emotions, you're trying to figure things out anyway. Like, it's really tough. And I think there isn't a framework for how to live well. And I think some people have a faith in their lives, other people don't. And I think the good thing about philosophy is it doesn't matter where you fall. You can have a faith, but you can also apply philosophy. And if you don't have a faith, it doesn't matter. You can still use these ideas. So it's going to be applicable to everyone, really. And I think having something that you can lean into when life gets difficult is really powerful. And I've tried to make it as practical as possible, because I know that the thing with philosophy is it can come across as a little bit dusty if it's presented. If you go straight in for the hardcore texts, and you can get bogged down in the academic side of things. And I think a lot of people would really connect to it if it's not presented in that way. I know that I certainly wouldn't have as a teenager. I kind of pushed back against a lot of things at school, and I found that if it was overly academic, I didn't engage with it in the same way. So I'm hoping that tapping into the practicality of these ideas and how it can actually translate, and also some of the quirky ideas, because there's some bizarre stuff these philosophers did, like the banana walk and whatnot. I think I'm hoping that will really encourage younger people to to connect to this subject and really kind of spark that curiosity. Because this isn't a book that has all the answers, but I hope it is the spark that allows people to start asking more questions. And that's where change happens, when you start questioning everything and getting into this as a subject, because it's a huge subject and there's some wonderful ideas within it.
For sure. One of the ideas in the book that I really gravitated towards, because I love practical, actionable ideas, is the Buddhism idea of reduced suffering, or reducing suffering. This idea of being shot with a poison arrow, and you would want the doctor to just deal with the problem. You'd want them to get the arrow out of you, fix you up, rather than stand there asking you, a million questions. How does it feel? How did it feel when it hit you? What could have happened if it hit you here? You wouldn't care about any of that. You'd just say, get this thing out of me. How can we apply that idea to the little thoughts and anxieties that trouble us on a daily basis?
Well, it's such a great parable. I think it gets to the point really that sometimes our over-analysis and our thinking, our critical mind can actually get in the way. Sometimes we just need to deal with the problem to hand. And within Buddhist philosophy, there's a real heavy emphasis on mindfulness and being present. And in a way, when we have a problem, that mindfulness, like, okay, let's deal with the problem. Let's not keep going over all these may or may not situations. Let's try and address the problem, and let's be mindful. Let's focus on it and deal with what we've got in front of us. And it's very practical, actually, just getting on with the problem. It's hard because the mind can race at 1,000 miles an hour. And actually, that's one of the beautiful things about meditation, which is a huge part of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhism, is learning to calm the body. Because when you calm the body with breath work and just actually like sitting and relaxing, that sends a signal to the mind to calm down. You're not in danger. And then that can help with the racing thoughts. And then naturally that allows you to deal with the problem and not kind of overthink it, which is something that a lot of us certainly do. I know that I can do it. So the meditation does help for sure.
Well, I think meditation is one of those words that scares people, and they sort of run away at the first point of hearing it because they think it's something religious, or it's something spiritual. There has to be another experience tied to it. I think another word that gets treated like that is Zen. When you say Zen philosophy, people instantly start thinking about a spiritual experience, or sitting on top of a mountain meditating for 8 hours straight or something like that. But Zen philosophy is, I guess, at its core, simply about reclaiming focus, right? And living in the moment, tackling what's in front of you. What's the most practical lesson you've taken from Zen philosophy?
So with Zen, I think, it's essentially it's a type of Buddhism as well. It's like a Japanese lens through which the Japanese kind of aesthetic experiences Buddhism. And I think for me, I've really enjoyed the idea of meditation so much through Zen as a lens, a Zen lens, if that makes sense. And the kind of minimalism that you get with this Japanese aesthetic. The temples in Japan, the Zen temples are very empty. There's just space. And you've got the classic Zen garden, which is kind of stone, rocks, and like key features, these stones sort of strategically placed around. And there's a peace and tranquility that comes with that. But on a personal level, meditation has been really helpful for me. And I think that Zen kind of has an emphasis on meditation. It's at the core, really the way to understand yourself better and achieve, what they say in Zen, enlightenment. And that's always I guess it's a loaded word, isn't it? It's one of those ones like God. There's so much to unpack with it. And I think so enlightenment is that sense of trying to, again, so many people have different explanations, but the idea of understanding the mind and being sort of present and content with where you are in the moment. And meditation is a great way to kind of get into that headspace as well, to settle the mind. And it is very practical. I think that's the good thing. You can actually do something. It's not, you don't read about it. You have to do it. You have to sit there and deal with the consequences of trying not to think, because you're going to think. You can't not think. So with time, slowly, the thoughts become less kind of chaotic, and that there's a peace that comes with practice. But it's something that needs to be practiced. It's hard to kind of instantly do it. The first time you try meditation, it's brutal. Your mind is like, and almost that in itself is powerful, because you're conscious maybe for the first time of how much your mind is racing. So that awareness, if you bring that awareness, and that's great to facilitate change, because actually when you know that your mind is racing, then you can go, okay, let me try and do something about it. Let me just sit and let these thoughts eventually just settle. So if you focus on your breath, that's a good way of kind of working through it.
Yeah, I think, people don't realize until they try it how hard it is. I think for me, that when I first started I downloaded a couple of apps. Everyone's maybe heard of Headspace, things like that, and you try them out for a couple of minutes, and it just gets you to focus on your breathing, but it also gets you to acknowledge every time a different thought enters your head, and you become quite conscious of how often they do that. The one I enjoyed specifically, there was an app that Sam Harris made called Waking Up. The thing for me, especially when I was in university, these apps tend to be quite expensive if you want the full subscription. What I enjoyed about Sam Harris is, and which is why I would recommend it to anyone out there, and I'm pretty sure they still have this feature. There's a feature on the app that when you go to buy it for the year, let's say, I don't know what the price is, but let's say like 70 quid or something. If you are the type of person that, that's a lot of money to you, can't afford that, there's a feature on the app where you can email the team, and you just say to them, look, I can't afford this. You don't have to give a big explanation. They just take you on your word, and they'll just grant you the year's subscription for free. So that is a tool I would suggest to everybody out there to try it, because I know these things are very hard to do on your own at first. So I think these apps can be a very powerful tool as well. And meditation looks different for everyone. Some people, it might be an app. Some people, it might just be them in a room in silence on their own. Some people may be in like an ice bath. Maybe that's the way they meditate. What does it look like for you?
So for me, I kind of like this Zazen type of meditation, which just means seated meditation. You literally sit there and do nothing. You just focus on your breath. It's very simple, and you put the timer on the phone, and that's it. I feel that it's like the most direct experience for me, because I've done a lot of apps as well, and they've definitely really, really helped. I think when I first started meditating, having a guiding voice was just so helpful. It helps you to know what to do, and actually you kind of relax into it. But I think now, just for me, just having that space to sit and allow my mind to sort of settle like a snow globe, that's been shaken up. If you let it, keep it still, all the snow settles. So that's the kind of meditation that I'm interested in. I commit to that. So I find you don't need to do loads and loads, but I find that really, really helpful. And that's my practice, I guess.
I imagine that's quite tough with a 3-year-old though now.
It is, yeah. But I think seeing how useful it is, and how that naturally translates into me feeling calmer, and I can see and feel the benefits, then it's something that I prioritize, because I know it makes a difference. And it is hard sometimes to carve out the time, but even just a little bit does make a difference. And it's part of this, there's things like exercise and meditation. These two have really helped me over the last decade. I think they've just been so transformative and so powerful. Whatever I'm going through, these are kind of anchors in a way in my life. And I know that if I'm not feeling great, you can guarantee that I haven't really been exercising, I haven't been meditating, and I've probably been eating badly. So these things kind of add up, and you can almost reverse engineer feeling bad, because if you don't do these things, I find that, I can sort of feel that I'm not doing it, if that makes sense.
Speaking about peace, tranquility, simplicity, tell us about Epicurus's garden.
Yeah, so Epicurus, the ancient Greek philosopher who believed the meaning of life was to enjoy it. And he created this garden in Athens. That was the name of his philosophy school. And it was like a retirement home. I think the problem with Epicurus is that a lot of people think because he wanted to enjoy life, that he was this wild party guy. And actually his garden was just this crazy party place and everyone would go and, debauchery, whatever. But actually it was more like a retirement home. Everyone grew their own vegetables and fruit. They ate boiled lentils and drank water. And it was very, actually just low key, just very calm, very moderate. And this is a real misconception about Epicurean philosophy. I think lots of people think that he was just this like hedonistic guy, but actually he discovered that less is more. And that's really the key to Epicureanism. And that's really what they were trying to do in the garden. They were just driven by good conversation, and friends were an important part of his philosophy, spending time with other people and also kind of detaching from the politics and the public kind of dialogue, what was happening. So in a way, in a parallel to how it would be now, if we had the garden now, it would be like going on a retreat where you don't watch the news and you don't go on social media. You kind of detach a little bit. And actually that gives you the space to focus on being with other people and having conversation and eating simple food and appreciating the little things in life. And that's really what his philosophy was all about. So it's a nice take on everything, I think.
I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and it's something that's apparent in your work is that you take bits from different schools of thought, different philosophies, rather than sort of follow one rigidly. Do you think it's better for people out there to explore them all, explore different ideas, take things that work from different school of thoughts, rather than just follow one school of philosophy, one, or one person and try and live like that person? Do you think it's important to, take a little bit from everyone?
I think it depends on who you are. For some people, they will find their philosophy and that's it. That's them, and they connect to it and they're going to get so much out of it. I think you'll see this with people of faith. If someone is a Christian, like that's their structure. They've got this support network through their faith. So I think with philosophy, personally, I started and built this real deep, profound connection to Stoicism. And that was the thing that was really growing a big theme in my life. But I'm a very curious person. So I'm always looking for new ideas. And I also don't like to be sort of boxed in with something. So I don't want to be the Stoic guy. That's what I'm just known for. So actually there was an opportunity for me to continue writing just books on Stoicism, but I actually wanted to kind of be able to do other things as well and explore other philosophy. So I think for me, I love the idea of taking ideas from different places because you never know what you will discover. And that's quite exciting. I think curiosity is such a powerful force, and there's just something about that. Obviously, at the same time, there's power in going deep into one particular philosophy. So knowing it really well. So like Stoicism, I've got a very decent grounding of Stoicism, but I love to explore all these other things. And I think you never know where you're going to find your next bit of wisdom from. And that for me is what keeps me excited, keeps me going, knowing that there's so much out there and that I can take ideas from all these different places and start to build my understanding of the world. And I've got all these different tools, and my toolkit is expanding every time I come across a different set of ideas. So I think it depends on who you are, and there's no right or wrong answer to that. But I think it's nice to be driven by curiosity and see where it leads you.
Yeah. And it's certainly, led you and me to a lot of places. I follow a lot of your book recommendations, and I found myself I have a book downstairs on the shelf, exploring the examples of Taoism in Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you've got that book. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite books, The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. And it explains, as you said, Taoism through Winnie the Pooh. It sounds so weird, but it works. And it's such a great book, such a great introduction to this philosophy. And I honestly can't recommend it enough. It's one of my favorite books. I try and read it once a year. That's how important it is to me.
Wow. Amazing. Well, I think to start wrapping up then, we've talked a lot about your new book, Seriously Happy, which I will leave all the relevant links in the description below, and in our newsletter for people who want to go and check that out. To finish on the topic of happiness then, let's talk about the happiness equation. And that is, I believe, self-acceptance and gratitude plus self-improvement and living up to your potential equals happiness. Can you talk us through that equation?
Yeah, so I think this is a paradox. But I think if you can hold these two ideas in your head at the same time, I think this is a nice balance and something that can facilitate happiness. And this is certainly how I like to frame happiness. So on one hand, you've got present, like being accepting of where you are in your life and being grateful for everything that you have and really being appreciative. And that in itself is so powerful, that sense of gratitude and really being aware and present. But then the other side of the coin is also striving for improvement, self-improvement, knowing that there's so much out there and trying to become a better person. So there are obviously two ideas that are completely contrasting. One is staying stationary. One is, and being grateful for that. The other is moving forward. So they are opposing ideas, but I think they can actually work together, and you can kind of bounce between the two of them. And I think combined, that is a really nice equation for living a happy life. I think if we can hold those two things together, feel that we are enough as we are, but also striving to be better as well. Although they're contradictions, I think they work, and they're like two jigsaw pieces. And I think that can really help to get into a meaningful kind of state of happiness.
Brilliant. Well, before we let these guys know where they can find the book and more from yourself, I've probably asked you this question 3 or 4 times now, considering you've been on the show multiple times. And this will be quite a good reference point. I mean, you can go back over the years and find out what your answer to this was 2 or 3 years ago as opposed to now. But for Ben Aldridge right now, what makes life worth living?
I think, yeah, it will change depending upon where you are. But for me, the doing meaningful work and having a family and having that profound sense of purpose that comes with having a family as well. I think for me, that has been a huge thing, and being able to see my little boy grow and develop and, you know, being very happily married. I think that has such a depth of meaning to it. And also being able to do work like this, being able to write about ideas that I think are important and will help humans to progress. And I think those two are definitely the meaningful components of my life. Beautifully put.
Well, Seriously Happy, where can everyone go to? Is the best place they can head to right now if they want to check out the book and maybe buy a copy for themselves?
So if you go to benaldridge.com, then there's links to all of my socials and to the book. There's pictures and whatnot from all the philosophy challenges. But yeah, there's links to all the different bookshops, and it's a Genius link. So it depends on where you are in the country, all over the planet. So it will direct you to the relevant link. So it's kind of cool. Like if you're in the US, it will take you to the right link, because otherwise you have one link and it's just like, oh, hang on, where do I go? But actually it's quite clever. It's quite smart. So yeah, if you go to my website, benaldridge.com, you'll find everything there.
Amazing. And speaking of which, there are some very, very cool, interesting international copies of your book. I think the one I really want to get my hands on, is it the Korean one with the big banana on the front?
Yeah, so my second book on Stoicism got translated into Korean, and the banana walk featured in that book. And actually they really enjoyed that concept. So they changed the whole book title to Walking a Banana. And on the front of the cover, there's this manga style banana on a lead. And oh my goodness, when that came through, I was blown away. It was so funny. And because I talk about the banana walk so much, I just thought it was absolutely amazing. I've had messages from people in Korea saying that they want to go and walk a banana around Seoul or whatever. So I think it's really fun. It's nice to see them come through. And it's interesting how different cultures connected different elements and how that actually popped out, and that became the sort of key feature of that book. It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, if I ever find myself in Korea, that's going to be my souvenir or a cover. Ben, thank you so much again for joining me on the show. You've been on the show many times over the years, and you're more than welcome to come back many, many more times. I hope we have many more conversations to come. But all the best with the book. I will leave all the links below for everyone. I believe your Instagram is Do Things That Challenge You, which is a pretty cool handle to have, I will say. All that'll be in the links below. But thank you so much for your time today. Always a pleasure, my friend.
No, well, thank you so much for having me back. It's an absolute honor to come and chat to you again. So thank you. Thank you so much.